So before we go any further with defining material presets in Modo, we're going to need to understand how Modo deals with color. And so we're going to need to have a little bit of a theory discussion about color before we jump into the fun part of actually creating any materials. So first of all, let's open up a blank scene here. And again, this is completely blank, nothing at all in it. And that's important because we're not going to create a photometric scene here. We're actually going to create an analytical scene so that we can talk about color in its purest form. So let's go to our Model tab, and I'm going to create a plane here. And with that plane, let's right-click it and go down to Create an Item Mask. So in our shader tree, we will now have a plane item mask and a material in it. Now, importantly, for our analytical scene, we're going to want to set our diffuse amount up to 100% so that every bit of energy that hits this object gets bounced back as full color energy. Also, diffuse color needs to be 100% white, and specular, everything else should be 0. So we're just 100% diffuse. All of the energy from any light in the scene comes straight back to us. Also, we don't have any lights in this scene, and that's on purpose, but we do need to light the scene. Let's go to the Render tab, and before we can do that, let's say Add Item Camera. We will need a camera to look through. And in the Camera View Properties, let's set the Y position to 2 meters, and the X rotation to -90. So, and we can look through that camera up here in this viewport so we can see what's going on. Also, by default, we're looking through a perspective camera, right? That's going to act like any real-world lens would. However, what we want for this analytical scene is actually an orthographic camera, so there's no perspective applied whatsoever. Then we can zoom back in. Let's get this right where we want it to be. Something like this so that the rectangle fits perfectly right there in our screen. That looks good enough. And then we'll go back down here. We'll go back to our shader tree. We'll go to our render node. We're going to set our frame output to 512 by 512, a perfect square, so that now we have a rectangle that is filling our camera completely. Also, we'll grab this Modo UV checker image. That is in the default assets directory under images, under UV down at the bottom, and you just take that and drag it into the shader tree right above the material for this item. Now, by default, it's going to grab the UV map that was created for us when we created that plane, so it should map perfectly just as it is. Now, for whatever reason, we can see this in the render, and you would think we shouldn't be able to, right? Let's go to our render settings and to our global illumination, and this is the reason why. If we set our ambient intensity to 0, now we have a perfectly black image. And that's actually a good starting point for any analytical scene, right? So we know what absolute 0 is. Everything is turned off. Now, since we don't want lighting or shadows, we just want every pixel to return its energy as it is, we'll go to our ambient intensity and set that to 1. So now we're getting exactly the energy out of this that we are putting into it. So let's go to Add Layer, Special, Render Output, so we can control it. And now you're going to see that we have an image that looks exactly like the real image. Now if I go Render, this is a 512 pixel version of this image. And the colors on it are identical. You can see, even right here, side by side. Right now I have my camera view set to Gooch tone shading. If it's set to Advanced OpenGL, it might look too dark, okay, because it's applying lights from OpenGL to this image. If you set it to Gooch tone, it's going to show us the actual image pixels. And you look at these side by side, and doggone it, that looks pretty good. And by the way, if we go to our Modo UV checker, turn off anti-aliasing, it's going to get even crisper and look even more like the real thing. So we're not smoothing it out at all. So now this is the exact image, right? It looks perfect. Let's go to our final color output and take a look at a property down at the very bottom called Output Gamma. Now we created this final color output from scratch, so it's given us a gamma of 1.0. However, in a default Modo scene, when you open up a new scene, it's going to give you a final color output, but its output gamma will be set to 2.2 by default. And if we look at that, it's actually making our colors brighter. So Let's talk about this in the next video.